a little bit. Okay, so the last one is, do you see any dangers in trying to ban autonomous weapons? So just for example, if there was a Geneva Convention banning them, just as a hypothetical, what if some countries, for example, disobeyed the convention? And then in that scenario, is there any danger that other countries could be too late to try to combat the threat by this time?
So I think that's a good question. And I think as far as I know, occasionally some people violate the law against murder, but that doesn't mean we don't have a law against murder, right? It's still a good idea to have that law. And it's also the case that a ban on lethal autonomous weapons would not prevent the development of any countermeasures to autonomous weapons. Because autonomous weapons don't contain people, and so we can do whatever we want to them.
But sorry, so you're saying that banning autonomous weapons wouldn't prevent the countermeasures? I mean, I'm a bit naive on this topic, but I would have thought probably that good countermeasures might involve some element of autonomy as well.
So it's the thing that's being banned is lethal autonomous weapons.
Right.
So
Okay.
meaning
lethal being quite a key word there. Then.
Yes.
Okay.
Because autonomous weapons include things like anti-missile defense.
Sure.
Right, where ships you can put in an autonomous mode and then it will shoot down incoming missiles. And we're not proposing to ban that kind of weapon, even though this is often brought up as a red herring. Really not what we're talking about.
That makes sense.
But I would also say, and in fact, I have another meeting in an hour's time discussing exactly this. We need to put in as rigorous a verification regime as we can. And we've learned some lessons from this in the past. So, the Biological Weapons Convention had no verification or enforcement clauses at all. And the Soviet Union actually ramped up their biological weapons program after signing the convention.
Right. Yeah.
And possibly other countries kept some of theirs going as well. Chemical Weapons Convention has a lot more enforcement. In particular, it has the requirement for each nation state to implement laws that require all of their chemical producers to take appropriate steps with all precursor chemicals. And to account for who's buying them and how much is being produced, sold, and so on. So you do the same kinds of things with autonomous weapons.
But is that not a bit harder? Just because, for example, enriched uranium. I mean, talking about nuclear weapons here, obviously, enriched uranium is a relatively scarce resource and is easier to monitor than, for example, the tools you might need to create an autonomous AI, which actually...
but chemical precursors are very common. I mean, many of them are regular industrial products.
But for autonomous, I mean, for example, if we want to put a verification regime in for autonomous weapons, would that not be quite a bit more difficult?
But I don't see why it would be more difficult than chemical weapons, right? So the precursor things are, ground vehicles that don't have a human driver. They do aerial vehicles that don't have human pilots. So it's pretty easy to identify the precursor products.
But those things those things could be quite commonly used, I guess, in the country for like surveillance and stuff.
Yes, so that's the point. The chemical precursors of chemical weapons are also commonly used, and yet we managed to regulate them in ways that are appropriate and pretty effective. We've had very little usage of chemical weapons, and really only by Syria and to some extent in the Iran-Iraq war. But mostly it's been very effective. And the thing is, right, for a company to say, a sophisticated high-tech company to say, I am going to violate the international ban on autonomous weapons and I'm going to build tens of millions of these autonomous weapons, that's a really difficult thing to do. It seems to me that if there were a serious violation, it would have to be a complete clandestine underground manufacturing system and complex.
Sure.
And so, there are other steps as well, right? I think we have to make sure that that non-autonomous weapons cannot be converted to autonomous operation by software changes. So they have to be, physical design constraints to ensure that they can only be remotely actuated, and they have to be human control stations for each weapon, and so on and so forth. So, nothing's perfect, but I think, and this is something that I would like the nation states to sit down and seriously discuss. Can we come up with a verification regime that would be comfortable with, as opposed to saying, well, it might be a problem, so let's not discuss it.
Of course, which
is what they're doing now.
Of course, I also adhere to the same point of view on this, and playing devil's advocate a bit, just to kind of further discussion. I also actually did have an interview with Professor Pedro Domingos last week as well, and he's kind of very much on the other end, on the other side of the coin, and did give me a bit of thought as well, a little bit just about the fact that essentially adding a gun to a drone essentially turns it into an autonomous weapon. But as you're saying, as we've done with chemical weapons, there are still ways of inputting this verification regime in place, and it's very important that as countries across the world, that there's as you're saying as well, like
and there's a big difference between tens or hundreds and tens of millions or hundreds of millions, and if it's tens or hundreds, there's actually not much advantage to making it autonomous, right? It's easier to do a remote control weapon. It's also the case, just practically speaking, the natural way to design the weapon, if you were going to manufacture it in large numbers, would be to use, low power ASICs, so application-specific integrated circuits that are, a chip that's burned in specifically to carry out that task. But that's a really difficult thing to do technologically, right? And that requires a big stack. And the alternative would be, well, you have to put in the CPU and GPU. Which massively increases the weight and power requirements, and reduces flight time and so on and so forth. So all of these steps, every step has holes, but if it's the same with cybersecurity. You just you keep layering skin on the onion. Eventually, it's hard to get through.
That makes sense.